Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight on Socialist Action's continuing weekly webinar series. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the very pertinent and important topic of COVID-19, and particularly how it relates to racism, not only here in the US, but also around the world in different countries. So we're very lucky to have some great guests with us tonight. We're going to hear from them first, and then please type comments and questions throughout the speeches in the comment box, because we will be taking some questions at the end of the call. So before we start tonight, I would like to encourage you to check out our website, socialistaction.org. We have a great monthly newspaper, and our June issue will be up on the website pretty much probably tomorrow. So do check that out. And we post articles on there every few days, every day or two. We also wanted to let you know about a special webinar that we're going to be having on Thursday, June 11th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And that is going to be a special panel on police brutality and the protests that have been happening around George Floyd's death in Minneapolis. So please join us for that. We're featuring Pam Africa and also Rivera, as well as some of our own comrades from Socialist Action who have been part of the protests that are going on. So again, that will be Thursday, June 11th at 8 p.m. live streamed on our channel. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker tonight. The first person that we will be hearing from is Ed Juranis. He is a former anti-war GI and a member of Socialist Action.
All right. Can you hear me all right? Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Since I'll be speaking from the point of view of what's happening in the United States, as opposed to the other countries represented here tonight, I'd like to just start by saying that the COVID-19 pandemic has both exposed and deepened the enormous societal disparities between the benefits reserved for the 1% and the treatment for everyone else, meaning us, working people, the 99%. And let's just take a look at two examples, healthcare and jobs. To socialists, it's unacceptable that in the face of the coronavirus contagion, American workers are either uninsured or underinsured, that hospitals across the country have been closed in the name of profit, while the health needs of their communities are the greatest, that the lack of PPE and ventilators has become the benchmark of government inaction in the face of growing numbers of infected, and that the inhabitants of nursing homes, homeless shelters, prisons, and schools are now the fodder for the COVID-19 disease. All of this while the rich retreat to their yachts, their second homes, and their offshore havens to avoid infection. The profit motive doesn't work for our healthcare. And jobs. For the past 40 years in the United States, Democrats and Republican administrations alike have coddled the rich with massive tax cuts and subsidies, accompanied by an assault on trade unions and cuts to social services. A regime of austerity has seen the living wage and job security replaced by an economy in the US of part-time jobs, low pay, and few, if any, benefits. This has resulted in the greatest transfer of wealth from the working class to the ruling elite in this history of our country. And as the wave of the coronavirus emerged in the United States, it served as the tripwire, essentially, to the collapse of an already weakened capitalist economy. An immiserated working class, as I like to call it, succumbed to even new economic indignities imposed by our ruling class. In other words, overwhelming unemployment, food lines, potential for mass evictions, and universal fear of the future. As in healthcare, here too, the profit motive dictates what those in power are going to do. The areas of disparity are virtually endless. We could add the categories of poverty, equal opportunity, education, treatment of the disabled, environmental causation, and on and on and on. But no matter where we look, we see a pattern. As working people are facing an all-out attack on their lives and standard of living, for those segments of the working class which are Black, Latinx, Indigenous, or any other oppressed minority, it's qualitatively worse. African Americans, Latinx, and Native peoples have suffered the most severe consequences of the COVID disease. These groups experience the highest infection rates and a highly disproportionate number of deaths compared to whites. In one New York City study, Black and Latinx residents were dying of COVID at twice the rate of white New Yorkers, a disproportionate rate mirrored throughout the United States. Many communities of the oppressed have fewer medical facilities and less access to virus testing. The impact of the coronavirus onslaught has magnified the pre-existing difficulties germinating from systemic racism, such as inferior housing stock, higher rates of unemployment, and less opportunity for better paying jobs. Even the availability of adequate nutritional food is a significant shortcoming for many who are without grocery stores in the inner cities, but instead must rely on packaged, low nutritional food from nearby convenience stores. The coronavirus contagion and its free-falling economic catastrophe, now combined with an epidemic or a pandemic of racism, have together deeply revealed, in the most brutal of forms, the oppression suffered by the oppressed. And the murder of George Floyd is the most recent of a long string of atrocities directed at Black people, specifically the Black working class. In reality, the COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of racism are systemically related. They are evil twins. For those of you who can remember the Menendez brothers, who evilly, secretly, and with other brutal intent murdered their parents to gain financial benefits, it's not that different. In the same vein, I maintain that in reality, there is no substantial difference between that and the actions of for-profit nursing homes that concealed their failures to provide PPE to residents and staff, failed to provide testing to those showing COVID symptoms, and then lied about the cause of death, attempting to distort the reporting on the number of deaths in general and the deaths of Blacks and Hispanic people in particular compared to that of whites. And I ask the question rhetorically in some ways, is it any less murderous that poor people crammed into unsafe, unhealthy urban housing suffer egregiously higher rates of underlying conditions, making them in turn die from the contagion at much higher rates than white people? While the rich corporate owners of nursing homes, or the wealthy owners, overseers, I should say, of near derelict housing, perhaps did not plan or organize to have so many die in the pandemic, their goal to maximize profit simply ignores human primacy. Whether someone might die is not a factor in their business decisions. What they are, however, are silent, behind-the-scenes accomplices to deadly evil. Not technically killers, you see. They didn't actually pull the viral trigger. So what are we to make of the murder of George Floyd by the cops? A victim of death by the blue plague, so aptly put by Glenn Ford, who's an editor of Black Agenda Report. And here's our answer. The racism of the capitalist epoch, the era of Black people beginning with slavery and now experiencing the worst of the jobs, the worst of the housing, the least of the educational opportunities, the most substandard healthcare, the greatest propensity for development of underlying conditions, and the greatest likelihood of death by COVID pandemic is the same epoch where police are a defense force for the ruling rich. And it is their institutions and their economic system that perpetuate these conditions in the first place. The police, who in essence are agents of the ruling class, have nothing in common and are not on the side of the masses of people in the streets today wearing face masks to protect and to beat COVID and protesting police brutality and murder. The cops are there to defend the system. They execute the role of racist enforcers of an ingrained racist order. The police do not differentiate between popular resistance to inferior housing or to opposition to low-paying jobs. Rather, if you stop paying rent, or you assertively prevent scabs from entering the workplace you are striking, or if in your despair and desperation, you take part in liberating a lousy TV during civil unrest, be assured that the police will be nearby to enforce the capitalist rules of order. They've been taught by the system, as well as their blue uniformed coworkers, that people of color are inferior. They believe it, and they act accordingly and willingly as an oppressive force against them. While we're at it, let's clarify something. There are no good cops under capitalism. although there are some within the ranks who have moral qualms about abusing the oppressed. To qualify as good, however, they will need to move on to another occupation. So while the death of George Floyd is still shocking, it comes as no surprise in that data from 2019 of all police killings in the country, Black Americans were nearly 3 times more likely to die from police than white Americans, and that Black Americans were nearly 1.5 times more likely to be unarmed before their deaths. So whether it is the COVID-19 pandemic or the racism pandemic, the very same underlying conditions, the same ideologies, the same brutality underlie both. It is the misrule of capitalism, a system that places profit before human needs and features a world where lives are secondary to its behavior. And capitalism, is an economic and social order that has outlived the earliest historical rule and needs to be replaced. That's it for me.
Thank you, Ed, for your great talk. Please remember to keep posting those comments and questions that you have for our speakers. We're going to take those up at the end of the call tonight. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Malu Wakuja del Toro. She's a feminist Mexican novelist, playwright, screenwriter, and activist.
Hello. I was invited to this webinar by your fellow Marty Goodman, who has been always very solidarian with the fight and the movement in Mexico and in the United States with Mexican immigrants and the Ayotzinapa movement. And I'm grateful for this invitation. I'm here to debrief you a little about what's going on in Mexico, because it's your neighbor country, and something very challenging is happening there. To give you a little bit of context, the system is exactly the same after the elections, although the new president announced himself as a progressive leftist. That was his hook to be elected. But instead of being what he announced he was, he brought exactly the same elements of the ruling class, all the same oligarchs and the same system. Only this time it is more difficult to challenge it, because before the people hated all the presidents, and now the people think that this is a good president. We knew already this, we as leftists knew already this, because when no one who claims to be a progressive would do that. And ever since, he has a good relationship with Rudy Giuliani. And now that he's president, he has a very good relation with Trump. He never criticized Trump. And he became the National Guard, the Mexican National Guard became the Trump's border patrol. He is installing in the south the border that Trump wanted against Guatemalan people, Honduran people, and his bots are creating in Mexico racism against Central American and South American. So in a way, when Trump said, I'm gonna build the wall and the Mexican people are gonna pay it, he was right. He had AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the new president, doing that. And this is the context, just to explain how difficult and challenging the situation is in front of coronavirus. said he started building his projects with oil companies, construction companies. He wants to build a train that called Tren Maya in Chiapas, especially to fight the Zapatistas because they are the real opposition there, but mostly to displace the indigenous people. And it's an ecocidal project to build hotels, which for us means casinos, more organized crime, more prostitution, more women's traffic, and all the horror that we are already fed up in Mexico. That's what's going on. And at the same time, since he announces himself as progressive, he has the permission from the people to do outrageous things like the assassination of indigenous environmentalist leader Samir Flores. Because Samir Flores confronted AMLO, and he called him conservative. He's now calling everyone who opposes him as conservative, but never attacks Trump. In that situation, when the coronavirus started to be an outbreak in Mexico, he first didn't want to use masks. He made fun of politicians wearing masks, very much like Trump, you see. Then he, at the phase 2, he went to visit the mother of El Chapo, because he's now dealing in very good relationship with the cartel of Sinaloa. And he finally accepted that there was a pandemic. So you can imagine how bad the situation is in Mexico. It's not even truthful statistics of how many people are getting sick there. And at the same time, of course, the immigrant workers in the United States are completely ignored by the government. So by the Mexican government, and of course the US government. We have many people who are dying now, but there is no statistics in the United States. The only statistics is us learning that our fellow Conrado or Francisco or whatever died, because they are essential workers in the United States, but they are dying. So that is the debrief I wanted to give you, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Malu. So our next speaker tonight will be Kim Ives with Haiti Liberté in New York.
He's muted. He's muted.
Okay, I think I should be unmuted now. All right, thank you very much, Lisa, and I salute the panel. I thank Marty Goodman for inviting me to take part in this event. And unfortunately, our director, Bertini Dupont, was under the gun, as it were, on Monday nights. We come out Tuesday night on our weekly newspaper, which is in some ways the torchbearer or the metronome of the movement for revolutionary change in Haiti. Haiti has been seized in a what I have called in a recent piece I did for Rupture magazine, or the Rupture website in London, their second social revolution. The country has been in the throes of that upheaval really since July 2018, when the Jovenel Moise government, Jovenel Moise is the president, elected once again through US pressure and connivance with the ruling class in Haiti. And he tried to raise gas prices in Haiti about 50% in some cases for kerosene. And this ignited an uprising, as it has done in other countries around Latin America and the world. And that really has not ebbed until the coronavirus pandemic hit Haiti. This is a little bit the irony. We can see that various capitalist nations like the US or France, Macron or Trump, they were riding somewhat high given the artificially sustained boom and of, as Ed has pointed out, the coronavirus pandemic punctured that bubble, brought into clear, stark relief all the contradictions of capitalism, how it's not there at all for people's well-being, care, and now with the pandemic of police violence coming to light, as Will Smith said, it's not that it's growing, it's just that everybody has cameras now. And so we are really seeing probably the greatest existential crisis yet in the world, not only the United States, but in Haiti as well. It's just, how could I say, on hold or being paused while people try to get through this moment. Now, right now, the Dominican Republic, which is next door, has many, many more cases than Haiti. They have somewhere on the order of 20,000 cases of COVID-19, with 539 deaths today, while Haiti has 3,354 cases of COVID-19 with 51 deaths. Now you might say, well, how is it that Haiti is doing so much better, has less than 1/5 of the number of COVID cases and 1/10 of the deaths? Well, I think to some extent it is a measure of the lack of testing in Haiti. Many people have not been tested because it was only within the past 3 weeks, really in the beginning of May, in the middle of May, that widespread testing started to occur. For most of March and April and the beginning of May, there was very little testing in Haiti. And so many people may have died. People I've spoken to speak to great waves of flu and people dying from fevers and symptoms which we now associate with COVID. So many people may have already died from it. But at this point, the curve, if you look on the John Hopkins site, for instance, you'll see the curves of various countries. The Dominican Republic's curve is, you know, a fairly constant rising curve, but Haiti's is doing an exponential curve upward. It's almost going vertically at this point. So it's our feeling that this is going to get much worse in Haiti. They just had 262 deaths and cases emerge in the last 24 hours, which in a country of 11 million people is a great deal. But going back to the political and economic crisis in the country, the reason the uprising occurred in Haiti a year and a half, or now 2 years ago almost, in July of 2018, was because the situation had been really sustained by a program called the Petrocaribe Fund. Many of you and many of the viewers and listeners will be familiar with this, but this was a solidarity program initiated by the government of Hugo Chavez, carried on by Nicolas Maduro's government, which provided cheap oil and great credit to some 17 neighboring countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so Haiti received about $4.3 billion worth of oil from Venezuela. And part of the deal was that it got to keep 40% of the revenues and put them in a fund, a capital fund, which was repayable after 25 years at 1% interest. And then to use that money to build schools, hospitals, roads, things for the people's benefit. Well, because of the sanctions that the Trump administration took against the Maduro government, and because of the glut of oil on the market, because Saudi Arabia was pumping out 1 million barrels extra a day, and we think this was probably in cahoots with the US working to weaken both Venezuela and Russia. In any case, it became impossible to continue the Petrocaribe program in Haiti. Haiti could not even pay Venezuela because of the banking restrictions put. And so this really, this torpedoing of this solidarity project really became the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, today, once again, if there were any other straws, they too have been broken because the people see the complete negligence and complete incompetence of this government, which has for the entire country of 11 million people, somewhere on the order of between 100 and 200 hospital beds, which can deal with a serious case of COVID-19. Now, as I said, the many cases have not come to these hospital beds because people simply die at home. People are using home remedies, various combinations of ginger and lemon and leaves. In Haiti, there is a great tradition of herbal medicine. So many people turn to this, but sadly, in the case of COVID-19, it often is not effective. And so what we are seeing really is the increasing disgust of the people. And this is reaching, and this is key, and I don't see my timer on here. I don't know if it has been lost somehow, but I don't see it in my listing of pictures. But in any case, I'll try to wind up on this note. I think I'm about probably at the time. I believe that we're seeing a major shift now where we see the police forces in Haiti moving, increasingly being touched by this crisis. There recently was a movement among the police to form a union, which was fought very tooth and nail by the government of Michel Martelly. This resulted in actually a firefight between police and soldiers a few months ago, right in the main square of Port-au-Prince. So we had a very similar situation to what we saw in Russia a century ago, where you begin to have various parts of the armed forces break away from the established order and begin to be siding with the people. And this is exactly what the woman, Yannick Joseph, who heads that police union, said: we will always stand with the people. Well, the government seems to have backed down. They've made a deal with them. Has it assuaged them? We don't know. But in recent days, just yesterday, there was another faction of the police called Phantom 509. Now, this faction, it's unclear right now what they are, what they represent, but they have carried out a number of very violent attacks involving gunfire and shooting. And yesterday was another case. They had an action and there were some serious clashes. It's unclear how many people might have died or been wounded in those right now, but this is all symptomatic of the crisis of capitalism in Haiti. And I think, as somebody once said, when the U.S. catches a cold, Haiti catches pneumonia. It's a very serious crisis, and I think we will continue to see the continuation and approach of Haiti's second great social revolution in the months to come, as soon as the situation stabilizes after this COVID-19, or I should say not stabilizes, but finishes this particular stage when the COVID-19 pandemic begins to ebb in Haiti. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kim. Our next speaker will be Barry Shepard, a writer for Green Left magazine.
Hello, I'm going to discuss a bit the economy in the United States and some aspects of politics relating to Trump. First, the virus is not over, and today there was notification that there's some spikes, especially in states that reopened prematurely. The economy can still be affected by the virus. Some experts think that the virus will come back strong in the fall. If that happens, as other viruses have done, but no one knows what this one is going to do. But if that happens, it's going to again affect the economy as it did. But leaving that aside, the economy, it can't be just looked at abstracted from the virus. The virus and the economy came together in the beginnings of a downturn of the industrial cycle, that is the regular capitalist industrial cycle. So a crisis of overproduction and that began, combined with the blow of the virus and the shutdown. One thing that we should keep in mind is that this is a situation that has never happened before in the history of capitalism. And it's worldwide, of course, like the virus is. The virus is also not going away or in the rest of the world, so it can come back. And it is, from people coming from Mexico back into the United States, Americans. That is, U.S., everybody in the Western Hemisphere is an American, but the U.S. citizens. Now, the deep recession that has followed here and in the world is unprecedented. We can't look at any past examples to get an idea of what's going to happen. Even assuming that when the virus is defeated, which means it has to be defeated in the world, what will the recovery from this recession look like? We don't know. It could be very bad or not so bad, but we just don't know because we've never experienced anything like this before. Now, I want to move on to the uprising that's happening in the United States today. This movement has raised every question of the oppression of Black people. A few years ago, there was the idea current that we live now in a colorblind society, that racism has been basically overcome. What's happening now shows that was a lie. The the national oppression of black people in the United States has gone on for 4 centuries. And it never went away. It's taken different forms. The new form that it's taken is explained very well in a book by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow. The legal aspect of that is mass incarceration. And that's one of the chief jobs of the cops, is to arrest people and put them in the pipeline to jail. And she explains deeply how this affects the whole black community. Because when blacks get out of jail, doesn't mean that they are treated the same way as whites when they get out of jail. Because of the national oppression of blacks, very difficult to find jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And she explains how this affects the whole black community. But that's being exposed now. And one of the positive things about this new movement, and there's many positive things about it, is that every aspect, not just police brutality, although that's what it's been centered on, but every aspect of is being raised. And this, a key thing about this movement is that it has continued to grow. It's swelling. And it has made some gains. Now, Trump's response to this, let's go back in one second. Trump, in his election campaign, besides other things he projected, was that he was the strong man, the man on the white horse, the Napoleon that was going to come into Washington, clean out the whole government, and make things right for America, make America great again by the force of his personality. I won't go through everything that he's done, that he keeps saying that he's the most intelligent man in the world, et cetera, et cetera. But he's indicated a number of times that he might not accept an election that goes against him. So, and without going into the details, I would say the arbitrary and actions leading in an authoritarian direction reached a climax when he came out and said that the military will be used to smash these protests. In the face of the rising movement, which grew even after he said that, and where troops in Washington actually carried that out in one afternoon, shown on television. This has caused a group of generals and ex-generals and admirals of the United States Armed Forces to denounce Trump for that. They say, and we're not going to do it. Why did they say that? These are reactionary people. What forced them to do that? It was this movement. And what I'll end with is this movement shows great promise because as you listen to somebody, and it's young blacks, young whites, young people of every color, and when they express themselves, you hear them in interviews, they seem to grasp the depth of this question. So there is a good chance that this won't just be a flash in the pan, like we've seen in other things that have happened under Trump's administration. And if this continues, it might be and sustains itself. All the hopes of Trump to be the man on the white horse will be smashed. It's already been smashed a lot by this movement and what they forced the armed forces to do and what they forced the police to do, to back off. When the police backed off, suddenly there was peace, right? Any case, let's hope that this can sustain itself, which it has a good chance of doing. And that'll be an extremely positive development for the next stage of American politics. Okay, I'll end there.
All right, thank you, Barry. So I'm just going to finish off with a few comments myself here, and then we will go to some questions for the speakers. So the pandemic has been ravaging the racist prison system in the US. Nationwide, over 25,000 prisoners have tested positive for COVID-19. The true scope of the crisis is unknown given lack of testing, opaque reporting, and a lack of data in county jails. The state of California recently released 3,500 prisoners early due to the crisis, but this is woefully inadequate to address the spread of COVID-19 in a system that is crowded with nonviolent offenders, often picked up on trumped-up drug charges. As reported in The Guardian, some prisoners sick with coronavirus have complained that they aren't getting enough food and water while quarantined, and that they don't have access to doctors, temperature checks, basic medicine, phone calls, regular showers, outdoor time, or sanitary supplies. They've also reported being reprimanded for wearing face coverings or trying to clean their cells. Similarly, COVID-19 is also spreading in immigrant detention centers, which house undocumented immigrants who were picked up by ICE and are waiting to be deported. Many of these detention centers have abysmal health and safety records. Carlos Ernesto Escobar Mejia, housed at the for-profit Otay Mesa Detention Center in California, was the first detainee to die of COVID in the US. He had lived in the US for 40 years. Because people in ICE custody are held on civil rather than criminal charges, they could be released at any time. But over 26,000 people are still being held at Otay Mesa. Instead of wide-scale releases, ICE has adopted a policy of crowding people suspected of having COVID-19 into designated areas and waiting to see if they get better or worse. Inmates in the facility reported requesting help for Mr. Escobar Mejia many times without success. They were living on bologna sandwiches and crackers, the only food they were given for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and he was only given ibuprofen for his symptoms. In Sherburne County, Minnesota, ICE detainees have now launched a hunger strike to protest the deplorable conditions. Meanwhile, while thousands of Black and immigrant workers in meatpacking plants around the US were getting sick, Trump issued an executive order to force those plants to stay open. And we have also seen, I will add, a lot of migrant workers and undocumented workers who work in the agricultural sector out in the fields are also getting sick with COVID. And really, immigrants are some of the most vulnerable people to not only COVID, but they're also vulnerable to being exploited at their workplace. They lack a lot of protections, and they also have very little access to healthcare. So there's a real contradiction here between forcing immigrants to continue working in the food production sector, like in the packing houses and in the fields, while at the same time, we're seeing food producers throwing away tons of food that they can't sell on the market right now, while people don't have enough money to buy groceries. Despite all the dangers and the increasing, not falling rates of COVID infections around the US, the government is now pushing hard to reopen the economy and send workers back to their jobs. Profits are in a severe free fall not seen since the 1929 Great Depression. Accordingly, the back to work imperative being pushed by the ruling class and its political parties offers both a so-called scientific rationale as well as an economic bludgeon. On the one hand, there's an enemy in the scientific community that any premature generalized return to work today can only lead to increased death rates. While on the other hand, US workers are being beaten back to work by the termination of the government's token and short-term relief measures, and the soon to expire extension of unemployment benefits. It's not a question of if the second wave will hit, but when. Nevertheless, we can fully expect that yesterday's passivity will give way to massive working class fightbacks fully capable of shaking the system's very foundations. Unprecedented, millions are today aware that they are not isolated individuals who must suffer demoralizing fates. Predatory capitalism is being daily exposed in all its horrors, inequalities, injustices, and greed as never before. Today, we are seeing not just the US, but the world rocked by the largest protests seen in decades in response to the brutal police lynching of George Floyd, an unarmed Black man in broad daylight. In response, the working class has poured into the streets in millions, despite being in the middle of the worst pandemic in the last 100 years. I live in Minneapolis, just a few blocks from the 3rd Precinct police station, which was burned by protesters last week as the world watched. Minneapolis is now in its 2nd week of protests, which have spread across hundreds of cities in all 50 states, as well as around the world. Black and brown communities, which have been most heavily affected by the pandemic, are now in the streets, exercising their class power to not only demand justice for George, but that the corrupt police system built to repress the working class and protect the property of the ruling elite be reformed or abolished. The class consciousness is being collectively raised, and people are coming together now to organize in the streets for real, meaningful change. In my community, people have donated thousands of bags of groceries and millions of dollars to help people and businesses affected by the looting that occurred early on during the protests. Last week, community activists commandeered a Minneapolis hotel to house homeless people who were living in tents in the areas that were burning. They are now staffing the hotel with medical personnel, arranging for basic needs like laundry and food, and helping the people housed there find permanent housing. This is the spirit of the working class in action. We will inevitably see more of this in the coming months. We must do all we can to fully support and engage in working class community movements that are fighting for a better world for everyone. So I would like to thank all of our speakers, first of all, for joining us today. We're going to go to some questions and comments now for the speakers. So please continue to post questions and comments in the comment box. And we're going to go in reverse order with the speakers, and you'll each have about 3 minutes or so to answer whichever questions you would like to.
I'm going to withdraw mine, Lisa, if you don't mind.
So I'm going to read off some of the questions, and then we'll start with Barry first, will be first to respond. So one question we have from our audience is, what is the role of the liberal media and Democratic Party in this moment? And then a few other questions we have. Why is the Trump administration pressing for back to work measures when the number of daily new cases is steady at about 23,000 a day? Another question we have, it's been estimated 42% of jobs lost in the pandemic aren't coming back. What would a post-COVID society look like? How has revolutionary Cuba's response to COVID-19 distinguished itself from the capitalist nations of the world? And how is the COVID-19 pandemic, the back to work measures, the lack of personal protective equipment, the bailouts of trillions of dollars to the rich, how has that revealed the nature of US capitalism? And then how will this affect the consciousness of working people in the future and socialists' ability to intervene and fight back struggles to come? So Barry, you're first up to take it away with some comments and
questions. Okay, I should have said I'm on the phone, I'm not on the Zoom. But I just want to discuss one question. Is the Democratic Party the answer to Trump? The answer is no. You don't fight authoritarianism first place by choosing the lesser authoritarian. Let's just look at some facts. The new Jim Crow was set up by both Republican and Democratic administrations since the 1970s, since the end of the 1960s. Step by step, it's been set up. That proves that the Democrats are not the answer. Finally, Joe Biden himself has a racist past. So the Democrats are not the answer. The answer lies in mass action as we are seeing it today. That's what can defeat Trump. I'm sorry, I have a thing I have to take care of. I'm on speaker. I'll just leave it going while I have to do that.
Thank you, Barry, for joining us tonight. So next step, Kim, you have a few minutes to respond to a few questions.
I have to unmute myself. Okay. Am I good now? Yes. Okay, I can't hear you, however. Yeah, I think essentially the liberal media and the Democratic Party, they represent the establishment, what we could call the globalist elite. They are there primarily to try to preserve the system and offer Joe Biden as an alternative, when in fact we understand very well, as I think even very trenchant critics like Cornel West, who has been appearing on many of the liberal media's broadcasts, I've seen him on BBC, MSNBC, etc., that whether neo-fascist in the form of Trump or neoliberal in the form of the Obamas, the Clintons, the Joe Bidens, the Nancy Pelosi's, the people are fed up. They don't want either of these anymore. One thing I think we should point out is that I think the Democrats are using a policy which in fact was pioneered in Haiti. It's called the politique de doublure, which means the politics of the double, where in the struggle between the ruling classes in Haiti, they had the comprador bourgeoisie, which was often of foreign extraction or mulatto, and the big landowners who were more Black in heritage. And you had the bourgeoisie would put forward a candidate who was a Black man to basically try to trick the people. And I think this is the essence of what we see with the Democrats and the liberal media pushing the Obamas, the Cory Bookers, the Kamala Harrises, or other oppressed groups in a way to try to fool the people. So I think it's very important for us to see that we need the systemic change for any real change in this, because of fundamentally what the police are anti-labor. They were born fighting, chasing slaves, born fighting strikes. They were essentially the tool of the capitalists against the working class. And we can't forget this, whatever type of veneer they put on it. And to me, that's what the liberal media and the Democratic Party are trying to do. All right, I could go on. I don't want to take
So Malu, you'll have a few minutes to answer a few questions.
Well, just regarding the question on what's going to happen, what's the future of this, I think that that's up to us. It's not something that we should be wondering like for a fortune teller to tell us. You were talking about something that very important, that the liberal media and the Democrats. What's going on with the important thing of this movement is that the movement itself changed the narrative. It's no longer like a fight, an argument between Trump and Nancy Pelosi. It's the systemic racism and injustice and inequality in the United States. And I think that is very, very clear, and that is a problem for the Democrats, but not for the people. And it is up to us to see what's going to happen. I think the question should be, what are we going to do to avoid the return to normality? Because normality was a nightmare. So how can we think that another world is possible, like the Zapatistas say, and how are we going to prevent the Democrats from kidnapping the cause, the narrative, not the movement, because they cannot do that, because the movement is real, but the narrative, they kidnap all that.
Thank you. So we'll end with a few comments from Ed.
Well, I think the the intersection of the COVID-19 and racist pandemics has been unprecedented. And because it's unprecedented and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people at this point have poured into the streets, I think we, in looking at where we're going to go from here, have to realize that even as the pandemic, I'm not going to say winds down, but perhaps becomes of lesser intensity in the United States, we're going to see that people have not changed. We're hearing that in interviews right now with people in the streets who are saying just that we are never going to go back to where we were. And what we're seeing in an unprecedented sense as well is that society as a whole is, and the Democrats in particular, and the liberal media are doing their darndest to try to show that they really are on the side of these masses of people that are out there. I've never seen liberal media coverage like I've seen it today, and they're doing it for a reason, and they've never done it like this before. They're fearful of the mass movements that are in the streets. The division in the ruling class that we see right now between all these ex-generals and ex-military coming out against the president of the United States shows that there's a serious division in the ruling class right now in fear of where this mass movement could lead, not only from the point of view of those who are in the streets, but in terms of the intensive activity in the oppressed communities and in the immigrant communities for that matter. So going to the question of what's going to happen in a post-pandemic world or a post-pandemic society is that, first of all, we need to be on guard to the fact that the pandemics are not going to end. This pandemic may be toned down. It's not going to end. There will be other pandemics, as scientists are already predicting, because capitalism will not deal, is unable to deal with the root causes of these pandemics. And it in turn is going to further fuel the resistance of people to virtually every element of capitalism. We're going to see it in areas that we haven't really seen it intensify just yet, the leading place being in terms of folks who work for a living and who are going to organize in their own self-interest. So I think across the board, the response from the American people is yet to be seen in terms of its full intensity, as intense as the response has been already. And I think we've got to keep our eye on the efforts of these generals. This is unprecedented in its own right. The efforts of the organizing that's going on in community after community after community. And then we need, as socialists, we need, as progressives, wherever we happen to be, to interject our thoughts along the lines. We need to call very clearly for self-determination for the oppressed nationalities. We need to call for a complete rebuilding of the poor neighborhoods in the inner cities and the tribal lands under worker and local control. We need to interject our demands or our ideas as to what needs to be done in order to get the ear of these folks who are out in the streets. Because, you know, I frankly think that the ruling class will dump Trump in the fall and he will not be reelected. I really believe that. And I might be proven wrong. And it's not the end of the world if he is or he isn't. But the reality is that that's in play. And I think what we need to do is keep an eye on that sort of thing, but at the same time, be prepared to enter these mass movements and to do what we can to talk with people, to raise our demands, and to help them move their struggle forward.
All right. Well, I want to give another big thank you to all of our speakers for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. Hope we can continue to collaborate together and that you all are well in these chaotic and unprecedented times that we're living through. So I'm just going to give another shout out to urge people to check out our website, socialistaction.org. We have a lot more coverage on there on the topics that we've discussed tonight and other topics. And I want to urge everyone to join us again Thursday night. That's this week, Thursday, June 11th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Here, Pam Africa and Carlito Rivera and other activists that have been on the ground during these protests talking about police brutality. You can find that right here on our YouTube channel. Thanks, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.